If I recall correctly, that's why, and so that's why everything got goofy. So they had to end up dropping a frame, and I think some of it was also time sync issues, and it was weird.
I don't understand why they why they wouldn't do 30.
It was a very good reason. Like when I learned about it, it was a very solid.
It was a
Okay, well,
very
I
good.
can see how you can't get around this. Again, it's one of those they kind of painted themselves into the corner with their requirements. It's like we're going to create a new operating system that fixes all the problems, and we're also going to make it fully backwards compatible with the old operating system. It's like, okay, so you're fixing none of the problems then because it's fully backwards compatible, which means all the problems in the old one are in the new one. So, okay, good, wonderful, excellent.
Well, it's like if you've ever heard the like why is it that the space shuttle, like how did they decide how wide the tracks were for doing the space shuttle?
I think I've heard this before. Is it
So it goes through a bunch of steps. Like
right?
so they made train tracks wide enough so that they could fit the trains that like they used horse, carts, so
Right.
carts were this width. And then why were carts this width? Well, it goes back to England, and why was
Yeah.
it? And it gets all back to it's the width
Uh
of a
huh.
horse's butt,
That's it. Yes.
right? So
Yeah.
that's why train tracks are that width, is because
Or
that's
that
how big
size.
a horse's butt was.
But well, and it's interesting too because, like, even when you go like in a city nowadays, when you go downtown, there's a bunch of one-way streets, and usually the reason why there are a bunch of one-way streets is the initial streets were built for like wagon width vehicles,
Oh yeah,
which like
yeah,
early Ford, old Fords, Model A's, Model T's complied with that, right? Because it was a horseless carriage. But then it quickly kind of changed when they realized, well, we can spread these things out and have a little bit more room and have a little bit more space. But still, and so, now the requirements have changed even in terms of where it used to be two cars passing, like this. Now it's just like one kind of gets through, but this it's still the same, right? Like lane widths.
have you ever been to Salt Lake City?
I've never been to well, I've been to Salt Lake City, but I was very young, so I was not driving.
So if you ever go to Salt Lake City, you will
Oh, they have
actually
the
notice a
huge.
difference.
That's right. I remember watching a video about how
It's
stinking massively
They
wide
made
the
it so
streets
that you
are.
could take a oxen cart and you could be able to turn it around in the street.
Oh my
So it had to
goodness.
be wide enough to be able to have oxen, which was wider
Uh-huh.
than, like you said, your normal streets.
Following down the slippery slope of I'm curious about this thing. I fell down like a whole because I love civil engineering. Like I'm a nerd, it, everybody knows it. But I felt like the like civil engineering and road grids and how they plan the roads and all that kind of stuff is really interesting. And I ended up watching a little expose on the massive width of the Salt Lake City streets and how just giant and spread out
Yeah,
it
like you,
is.
we went there and they got to talking about them.
Yeah. Well, yeah, and that was the thing. Like, the tour guides will always talk about how wide they are because that was one of the parts of that. So
Yeah,
I don't know. It's really interesting. Plus, it's one of those things like looking at like road planning is also interesting because it also is so dependent upon the terrain. Like you look at Phoenix. When we lived in Phoenix, it's a grid. It's everything's north, south, east, west. Very, very easy to get around in. Very, very large, but very easy to get around in. You have central, and then you have Avs on the west side. You have streets on the east side, and then you have major east west like Bethany Home, Camelback, all the way down to baseline. And when you know those things, you know exactly where you are in all at all times because you're like, well, where is Camelback from me? Okay, it's a little bit north, and I'm at 56th Ave. Okay, so I know exactly where I am in reference to the entire city. Then we move. So Phoenix is, I don't know, 5 million. It's big, very big. Then we moved to Denver, and I don't think Denver back then is as big as Phoenix, and it's just a ginormous mess. There is nothing that makes any sense anywhere, and it's because it's at the foothills of the
yeah, yeah.
mountains, and at the foothills of the mountains, you can't just make a straight road. Like you can't just whoop. You got to go around the
I
terrain and
mean,
make
you can
everything.
now.
You
You
could. It's just
couldn't
way
then.
more expensive. Way more expensive. Yeah, right. And so
Yeah,
even the orientation of like downtown Phoenix is north, south, east, west. It's square, right? downtown Denver is like at a slant. I think it's 45 degrees off. And so then everything kind of flows out from that and it just ugh. Now again, when you get further out toward like Aurora and out into the plains, it gets a lot easier to get around,
Yeah.
but it's still a giant mess. I don't know how long has it been since you've been to Denver?
Well, I've been to Denver, but I just kind of like go through
Yeah,
it.
well,
I go on the major road, right? Like,
yeah, my favorite part of Denver is trying to get on I-25. Like
well,
you spend
you
about
want it to be worse, go to Salt Lake City and figure out like there is one road. Like there is one road that goes north south
north south.
through the whole Salt Lake City area.
I'm gonna pull up. I'm curious now. I got to pull up a map.
Well, because it's right in between, right? The
Uh-huh.
mountains and the lake, and so
And
there's
the
one
lake.
interstate that anybody who goes has to go on, and traffic
Mm-hmm.
ain't getting any better.
There's like one way in, one way out.
Yeah,
Yeah, because it is. It's really mooshed up in there, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. So you got I-15. That's all you got. That's pretty much all you got.
that's it.
Wow.
So you mentioned our friends at Cloudflare. So
Oh, yeah, Cloudflare.
did
Awesome,
you have
Cloudflare.
thoughts on this?
Or you talking CrowdStrike?
CrowdStrike, sorry.
CrowdStrike. Oh my gosh. I don't really have thoughts other than, of course, it would happen. I mean, like one of the things that's always intrigued me the most about cybersecurity is how the things that are supposed to ensure your cybersecurity often becomes the things that destroy your cybersecurity. Like, for instance, like your cameras that monitor, you put them on the outside of your house, you put them on the inside of your house, whatever. And you're like, okay, that's cool because now I can tap into my cameras, I can see what's going on, everything's great, awesome. Helps me with my security. I can see who's creeping around in the backyard and front yard, and I can see who's in the living room. And honestly, outside cameras not that big of a deal. Inside cameras I have qualms with, but uh, just because I was curious about it, I did a bunch of research. I think it was like 2 years ago, and most of those cameras run on the same operating system. And that operating system, whether you like it or not, opens up a single UDP burst, like a channel, video channel burst, like that. If you can gain access to the network, you can just get into the channels, right? And just watch. Like it's not that big of a deal. And so at that point, it's a situation where it's not, like the thing that's supposed to be making you safe is actually making you less safe. So like when CrowdStrike happens, this whole thing where they're like bricking blue screening Windows systems left and right, which I was glad that. Well, of course, I don't have anything to do with CrowdStrike, and I don't have anything to do with any of their software. But I'm glad I have a Linux. At the very least, there's no way that my computer could be infected in anything like that. But
Oh, it
it
can be
is.
infected. If you let me, I can do it. It's okay.
No, I'm not gonna let you. But here's the other thing. One of the things that like when you talk about virus scanning or whatever, right? Like any sort of an antivirus software, a lot of people think that it's just another piece of software, just like every other piece of software. And without really realizing that in order for an antivirus software to work, it's got to go really deep. Like it's got to be installed really, really deep into your system so that it can actually observe the different types of activities that malware exhibits, right? And so a lot of times, antivirus software acts a lot like a virus.
Well,
It's
and
like
AV software is notoriously
it's
um
scammy. Yeah.
I mean there's a lot of issues with it, right? Like
Right.
scammy
Right.
in the fact that like signatures, right, are easy to change. So
Hmm.
then you're looking at, indicators of compromise, and that can
Hmm.
also be buggy. It's
Hmm.
sitting there, like you said, running at the OS level, right? So you've
Hmm.
got a lot of risk associated with having that ability.
Yep.
And also like they a lot of times, right, end up having to use undocumented APIs, which is
Yep.
also super problematic, which is why
Wait, wait,
like,
wait, wait, wait. Secretive code doesn't mean that your system is secure. Are you telling me that that's maybe a major principle in cybersecurity or something like that?
well,
If you rely on secrecy, it's like, and that's why it's secure.
yeah, but you literally rely on secrecy for your whole OS, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
There's two different types, right? If you're relying on the algorithm
Secrecy,
makes
it's bad.
it
Yeah. Yeah.
secure, right? That's a problem, but having a secret is not a problem. Like
Right.
you
Well, and
have to.
secrets are absolutely necessary. I mean, what about your key? What about your password? I mean, there are things that do need to be secret. And
Well,
what about the contents of your drive?
and your, you know, every OS is downloading patches from somebody and they're trusting
Right.
somebody. You're either
Right.
trusting Ubuntu or Microsoft or Apple. They have the keys and the
Uh huh.
ability to do
Hmm.
whatever they want. So if the
Yeah.
government came up to them and had an actual legitimate reason,
Yeah. When I try to like speaking of key escrows, like that's one of the things that again I don't think a lot of people can like really think about much. Like I was trying to get my daughter to understand, and I was like, they have these key escrows. It's kind of not very secure, and she's like, I don't get it. I don't understand. And I was like, well, what about let's imagine Master Lock, the like the lock company, and they make a boatload of locks, whether it's padlocks, door locks, deadbolts, whatever. Let's just imagine that every single lock that they make, they keep a key to get into every single lock that they make, and you don't really know where they're stored, and you don't really know who has access to them, but someone somewhere can get a key to your house and just get in, right? And Evie made a great point at that point. She's like, well, what about lock pickers? I was like, well, yes, but this is like a giant centralized repository of all the keys of all the
well,
locks
and
that they've
also
had.
lock pickers are picking, they get to pick one bit at a time,
Right, right,
as opposed to, and there's only 5, 6 bits,
right.
as opposed to somebody who has to guess 128 of them, and you have to get them
Yes.
all right. And if you get them
Simultaneously.
wrong, you just get them wrong.
Right, right. And
There's
that's
no
where,
indication of like, oh, you're
no,
50%.
yeah, you can't like feel the tumblers and like I'm close, I'm close.
Yeah.
But it's the same sort of a concept. Like some company somewhere just has the keys that can get into your house and rifle through things, and honestly, they can give those keys to other people to come into your house, and they can do kind of whatever they want with that key escrow, and that's it's a. I mean, you can't just think about it too much because there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, honestly, what
Well,
what
but
am I
see,
going to do about it?
I actually think it would be a good thing, right? Like, I honestly think that every, pick your choice, right? Every phone,
Hmm.
right? So every phone should have a public private key that is encrypted by, say, Apple, right?
Hmm.
Apple has their private key that they keep private, and and they give out the public one, right?
Hmm.
So the phone does the public key, it decrypts it. So the only people that could decrypt it are Apple,
Hmm.
right? And the only way that they should be able to give that out would be physically they have the phone, right? So you can have the best of both worlds, right? You have the ability, as long as Apple doesn't miss, they have to keep, there are keys they have to keep private,
Hmm.
100%, right? They sign their
Hmm.
OS, I'm guessing, updates.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
They've got to have that process. So if you did that, you'd have sort of the best of both worlds. Like, one, your device is secure, but
Hmm.
also we have a legitimate method of getting in, that, like, nobody else is going to be able to attack, right? They can't.
Right.
There is no
So like,
way.
what would be legitimate? Would it be like you got locked out of your phone, you lost your key, law enforcement? Is that kind
I
of what
think
you're
law
thinking?
enforcement is where I
Law
would go
enforcement.
with it.
Hmm.
I think that, or you actually bringing it to an Apple store,
Right.
or, and they ship it to Apple HQ and they, unlock it, given that you provide, your first of kin and your
Right.
social security
Right.
number and your
And a
driver's
quart of blood.
license.
Yeah.
A
The thing
quart of
that
blood? That's a
a
lot.
quart, yes, a whole quart. The thing that it always gets me, and this is just me being me, is you know it's a private company that doesn't really have oversight on under the law, right? So like a lot of times people get confused about, say, the Constitution of the United States. They'll look at Apple and go, well, this is a First Amendment issue. And it's like, no, the First Amendment has nothing to do with private companies. Literally has nothing to do with it. The First Amendment, whatever the thing they're pointing at, I don't care what it is, the whatever amendment, it only has to do with the government, period, is unenforceable on anybody else. Now, there are laws that sort of govern these sort of bodies and these entities, but we all know that large companies get up to shenanigans. It's the nature of the beast. It is what it is. They're all cutthroat. They do what they need to do, whatever. we in business school and business classes, we talk about ethics until we're blue in the face. I think in computer science and technology, hopefully we talk about ethics until we're blue in the face. But at the end of the day, there are a lot of people involved in a very large corporation, and some of them are a bit nefarious, right? So if you're talking about, say, like risk or like the probability of some bad thing happening, it can get kind of big at that level. Not kind of big. It can get very, very large. The risk can get very large at that level, unless they were to actually like do it like Coca-Cola does with their recipe, right? Like
Well, I
they
think
have
they could do it, right? Like they
two
could they
people
could
in the United
have a
States,
skiff,
no,
right, that has
right.
this is the private key. They go through a process of,
Mm-hmm.
I would guess, right? You would probably want to,
You'd
right,
have a heck of a
alternate
policy for
them,
that. Yeah.
rotate them out.
Yeah.
But like I can't imagine that they're getting 100,000 requests. Like
Right.
it's got to be in the thousands, right, that they're doing. And so
So,
you could build a facility to do that
right.
and to very very strictly manage, how those keys are created,
Right.
how they are used to decrypt phones.
Right. And
And
very strict
all it
because
has to do is decrypt to a string, right?
right. Right. And to me, the big thing is how can you facilitate those companies, make sure they don't sell it? Because like the data selling game, companies
Yeah,
have
but
something
I
of
don't think
value.
that's to me there's a lot easier ways to sell that.
Right. Like
Right?
like in what way?
Like well, through advertising or,
Hmm.
you know, and Apple sort of plays on the we're not going to sell your data. Like
Right.
that's a selling point of them. And I
It's a
think Google
feature,
at the
right?
same point would be just
Pretty
like that.
remiss
I don't
to
think they
doing
would
that.
have
Yeah. I think
any
I think
reason to
as a
do it.
because as I play it out in my head, I can't really think of a use case currently to sell keys. Um
Keegan, can you
I
grab
mean,
my phone?
because
Sorry.
honestly, if you're a company, you just want to be able to you probably have a good or a service, and you just want to be able to give that good or service to some sort of customer for some sort of money, right? So targeted advertising, which is selling your data so that you get the air fryer ads because you talked with your brother about air fryers the day before. You know that is, I think I don't like it. I don't appreciate it. I don't think it's good. But in the scheme of things, it's not that bad, right? It's annoying that it happens, but ultimately the motive is they want to be able to sell you an air fryer, right? If you think about the keys in that way, I can't really think of
Well,
like a
I mean,
use
I think
case.
other than like corporate espionage or
Right, right, which isn't going to really happen to like a most
but
people.
I think we so here's the reason I say this is that people spend, so for example, we had the guy that shot at the president, right? So they got
Hmm.
into his phone. So they have to spend tens of thousands of dollars, right, to be able to buy a Cellbrite or a Gray Key
Right, those are
in
so
order to get
expensive.
into a phone,
Hmm.
right? And that cost, right, comes back to all of us as taxpayers,
Right,
right? And I think we've got to be able to balance the right to privacy, right, with
right,
the um use of public resources for people who actually do commit crimes, right? There's got to be
right.
a balancing act somewhere in there.
There is, yes, and there
And
and there
I'm not
absolutely
saying that this
is.
is the only
Yeah,
solution. Like
right.
what we have is legitimate, right? Like
Yeah,
okay, there's a vulnerability in basically all devices at some
yeah.
level. At some point we probably will find it, so we will probably get into most of them. And
Well,
so
you can equate it to a like every time I come back to these digital problems, because these are digital problems that we have that legislation and statutory regulations are trying to catch up with, right? I think the best thing that we can do is try to connect those to like a physical world thing, right? So, for instance, we have a right to privacy in our homes. Okay, so there is a way for law enforcement officers to be able to come into your home to do an investigation.
yeah,
They can't just do it willy nilly. They can't just come to your house, break
yep.
down. I mean, there are bad ones that do, but in general, the the rule is you can't just break in. You have to
You
go
have
through
to
the
have a
process.
warrant, right?
You have to have
And
a
then
warrant. You
you
have to
can
have it documented. It
enter.
has to be public. You have to be able to enter. And then when you enter, And this is for us as like digital forensics people. It is this way whenever, say, let's say you got a device that's now in an investigation. There are rules that you have to
Yeah.
follow, and if you do not follow those rules, the evidence is inadmissible, right? It gets thrown out. It's immediately thrown out because you didn't follow the procedure, right? So I think the solution is there, and I think we're very close to that solution. And the solution is, the idea of applying the same regulations to physical stuff to digital stuff,
Well,
right? Like,
but I think also there is a little bit of an issue where your phone, people who are not Adam,
right.
has probably more data on you
Yes.
than anything else in your life.
I
Like
was
your phone, your house isn't keeping track of
where
when you
you're
made
going,
love
what
to
you're
your
buying, who
wife
you're
and when you
talking.
went to the
Yep.
bathroom, and
Yep.
it's not keeping all of those things that you should like. Does it matter? No, but you have no need to know this, right? This whole straw
Right.
man of, well, if you're doing nothing wrong, you have nothing to protect. Well,
Right.
a
But
lot of
you don't
people are
have,
doing
yeah.
nothing wrong but don't want to be seen naked. Like
Right.
that's just the thing, right? And
Right.
like so, you have some expectations, and these sort
Right.
of have amalgam, put a bunch of data into one single point. And so I think it's a
Right.
very, and it gets even worse when you look at what's that new Windows ARM Copilot, or is that what
Oh
it's
yeah,
called?
Copilot. Yeah. Yeah.
Like
Oof.
that has the ability to have your history for forever,
Right.
basically,
Yeah.
right? And it's all just once the device is unlocked, right? You have access.
Well, and to me, like a lot of people trying to understand that is like, because a lot of times people say, people will gather data from public locations, right? So you're on Facebook, you're on X, you're on whatever. And they'll be like, well, hey, if you're downtown New York, you don't have any, right to privacy. You don't. You're out and about, you're in a public place. Of course, you don't have a right to privacy. Where the line gets blurred is if someone was following you into every store that you went to and was
Yeah.
was writing down every person you were talking to and was
Every product you
documenting
looked
every
at.
yes, everything you picked up, the price of everything, and making a big giant list and following you everywhere. That's called stalking at that point, right? So
Yeah.
that is a crime, right? So and that's kind of where you're talking about is, there is some of the data that is rather innocuous. Who cares? If I went out onto my patio and sat for 30 minutes or didn't, what, like, but, like you said, there is a line that is crossed where there is some level of privacy that every human expects. Like when I'm in the bathroom, I expect my privacy, right? I don't want people
You
listening,
expect privacy in your bathroom? That's not how my
yes, believe
house
it or not.
works.
Do you have kids? Do you even have kids? Like that sort of a thing. And that's where, some of the people that take the argument way too far, like you said, like, well, if you have nothing to hide,
Yeah.
then you shouldn't have a problem with this. It's like, well, I don't have anything to hide, but I don't want you listening to me while I'm going to the bathroom, or I don't want you to see me naked, or I don't want you to know
Yeah.
whatever, those
Yeah.
sorts of situations. And where the balance is because you're right, the house isn't collecting data on you, and if you want to come into my house and serve a warrant, you have to be here physically, right?
Yeah.
On your phone that's connected to the internet, geolocation is totally inconsequential, right? So the only people that can really access my house are local law enforcement here, right? I mean, some FBI agents could drive here or whatever, but it's not the entire world that can
Yeah.
access
Yeah.
my assets, right? Digitally, that's a totally different situation, right? Because you're
Well,
exposed
and then we
to,
also get into the entire mess of, other countries. Like
right,
we're just talking about US.
right,
So
the
for example,
geographical, geopolitical, yeah,
China comes to you and, this is why I think it's problematic and why Apple won't do anything.
right,
Because if China comes to them and says, well, we have this dissonant or this person who violated the law,
yes,
right?
because
Like
they violated the law, right?
as a company, right? If you're operating multinational,
Mhm.
you should, unless you're
Mhm.
willing to bet a lot of money on the line, comply with laws in other countries. And
Mhm.
so you have to do that, right? And so if they come
Yes,
to you and they are a oppressive regime, or in our
right,
opinion
right,
oppressive, then all of a sudden now you've either got to pick, right? Am I going to do the thing that I think is right, or the thing that is according to the law
Yeah.
legal?
And that's where I think companies are the safest when they just, like you said, when they just don't. Like for instance, I mean, if you're a
Like when
communication company,
your pop star decides they're going to make a political stand.
yes, oh gosh, like
Dixie
the best
Chicks.
thing that you
I
can
mean,
do as
any.
a platform of some sort, like, is to just do end-to-end encryption and just be like, you know what? If you want to come in and take the data, that's fine. All you're going to get is a bunch of encrypted garbage, and I don't have the way to
Well, but
unlock it.
it's got to be decrypted somewhere, and almost all software has bugs, so it's gonna.
Right. And it does have bugs, but just minimize the cross section as much as possible, right? So that there's as little risk as that, as possible. Because you're right. I mean, if you're going to comply with US law versus Chinese law or Russian law, I mean, they're all legitimate. That's the hard thing that people struggle to get across their minds. They may be unjust, it may be unfair, it may be wrong, it even may be like crimes against humanity, but it was legal, right? Like
Yeah.
when we talk about the 1940s, for instance, some of the things that happened in Germany, they were all legal. They were all legal. So the whole basis
The
of, well,
tests
it's,
done on human
yes,
babies
all
and
well, the
adults
Holocaust was legal. That was legal. It was sanctioned by the government.
by a government.
Yeah, by that government, right?
I
And
mean,
so
they were war crimes, but
even whatever. But
post.
and that's the hard thing is, like, so many people will make arguments. Well, it's not illegal. Well, just because it's not illegal isn't a good argument.
Yeah.
But ultimately, if you're a company, you don't have the authority to be able to go, well, your laws aren't right
Well,
and these laws
you can
are
choose not
right.
to comply.
Yeah, you can. The issue is then you get shut down in China, which I mean, they're probably shut down in China anyway, so
Well,
you know.
I don't. I mean,
Yeah, because
Apple
it's
actually also has a giant risk of China saying, "Okay, well, I guess we're done letting you produce
right,
iPhones in China."
right,
And that's a lose for China, but that's also a lose for Apple.
right. Well, yeah, and that's something that it's interesting to me how a lot of companies they kind of have all their eggs in one basket in that way. They don't really have a lot of diversification on their manufacturing base. Like, it's all in China. It's all based in China. And it's a situation that if China were to catastrophically fail in some way, shape, or form, wow, how many American companies would just go bankrupt, right? Because most of the manufacturing and the
Well, do
production
you
that they,
remember in I think it was the early 2000s when there was a earthquake in Taiwan,
okay,
and like overnight the price of RAM like
shot through the
doubled
roof.
or tripled
Uh-huh.
because that's where all the RAM was made.
Yep.
And I remember it because it, of course, shot up, and then I waited, and then it shot back down, and I was like, "Oh, $1 a megabyte! Holy cow!"
Yeah,
Not
dude, I
kidding.
actually I actually do remember that. I remember looking I was trying to get some, I don't know what I was gonna get, because I think it affected a lot of, not just RAM, it affected flash memory as well. Because I wanted to just get
Yeah,
like a
yeah.
USB stick, I just
But
wanted to get
USB
like
sticks back then were like,
350. Like, if you wanted 4 GB, like
oh,
a
you didn't even
Kingston,
get close. Like I remember
yeah,
getting 128
good
megs, like
grief.
64.
So get this. This would have been in 06. I was working at the University of Kansas. I was a janitor, and I came across a Kingston 4 GB USB drive, which back then was like a $500 USB stick. So I did what was right. It was in the
I
mechanical
put it in my
engineering.
pocket and I walked
I
away.
put it in my pocket, walked away. I took it to the office and I was like, "Hey, somebody lost this. Somebody lost this." Well, I worked there I think it was another 8 months, and when I was a janitor, the secretaries were wonderful. The office assistants are always the best, and I
Yeah.
loved them to death. And they gave me lots of food, and I took really good care of them. One of the office assistants, little old lady, comes up to me and she hands me the drive and she says, "We've been sitting on this for 8 months and nobody ever came to get it, and I
Here
think
you
it's just
go.
yours." What's funny to me is now that I know more, I'm like, I plugged that into my computer
Yeah, but like
Back
honestly, like
then,
how
I don't
much
think.
risk it was there? Come on.
Well, and back then, really, I mean, come on now. Like, I don't really think there was as much as potentially nowadays. And but at the same time, I mean, I plugged in my computer and it didn't have anything. It was like
I
it had
mean,
never been
honestly,
used before.
do you think most drives you plug in actually have malware on them?
No, I think the
Yeah.
probability is extremely low.
You're
Unless
more
you're
like you're more likely to have somebody who is a white hat hacker put it on there than a black
right,
hat.
right. You're more likely to be part of a research project than you are to actually be exploited. That's
Yeah. Yeah.
that's what it is. But yeah, and it was. I just remember found it, I looked it up, and it was so stinking expensive,
Oh,
so
I remember
expensive.
paying $500+ for a CD read write that was USB.
Oh my gosh, jeez, Louise.
Well,
Yeah,
and
and
I also I had I don't remember I don't know if I ever told you this story. I had bought one and it was at Office Max, and I bought it and like I tried to burn a DVD or whatever, right? And it didn't work. So I took
uh-huh.
it back to Office Max and I got a different one. And then like 2 weeks later, somebody comes up to me and goes, "Is this your DVD?" I'm like, "Yeah." Well, I had left or a CD. I had left a CD in there that had something that they knew it was me, and I had left it in the drive when
In the drive.
I
Oh
put it
my
back.
god.
So yeah, came
Yeah,
back
well,
around.
and that was so that would have been right around. Okay, what did you think of Windows XP when it first dropped? What was because you would have been were you in grad school when XP
Oh
dropped?
no, I was in.
You were an undergrad? That was like 03-ish.
It was no, it had been early in that. Probably one
When
or
did XP?
02. I was working at the computer store at that point. Um,
So yeah, it was 01. It came to my attention in
yeah.
02, 03 because I was on 98 at that point. What did you think about XP when it dropped?
I mean, it was a lot better than
98 or
98,
ME
but
or
like there
2000?
were still lots of issues. Like I remember we were installing SATA drives at that point
Uh-huh.
at the computer store, and Windows XP didn't include SATA drivers until
Yeah, because
Service
that was
Pack
back in the
1.
Peta days. Yeah.
Yeah. So you had to like there were shenanigans you had to do to
Yeah,
get
just
it
to
to
get it to
work.
work.
I also had Windows 2000
Yeah. Did you like
running on.
2000 better than XP?
I did at the time, but I don't think it was like
Actually
I
better.
actually ended up having more problems with 2000 than I ever did with XP.
Yeah. Yeah. That's
But
kind of how it was for me because I tried the 2000 release for a while and I just hated it and I went back to 98 and then I went up to XP. But I didn't go to XP until like 03, which would have been a whole year into its release, which means they'd done quite a bit of patching and I but even then the drivers were just a nightmare at the beginning of XP because nothing really worked with anything for me. Of course, I was doing audio engineering at the time. Audio engineering, especially in a digital sense, was like brand new territory and everything was SCSI and everything was
yeah.
proprietary and so
Well,
like
that was always an issue.
everything that
Even in 98 that was an issue of
yeah,
like
it was
98 was
ridiculous.
worse because it would crash more often because if you had a bad driver and
Hmm.
you didn't know which one it was, like
It cooked you. Yep,
you were
it was done.
toast.
Yeah, and so again, it was really unpleasant, but I would say '07 up until about '07, I fell in love with it, right? Because I think familiarity, right? And it was really good and it was solid and it was stable at that point. And then they're talking about Windows Vista.
See that by that time I had already jumped ship. I
You were
was
Linux already, yeah,
no
or Mac.
OS 10. OS 10.
You were OS 10. Well, oh yeah,
I
because
was
I
in
forgot
love.
OS.
Like
Dude,
I
when
still
when
love it.
OS 10 came out, so I loved OS 10. I loved Apple back in those days. Number one, I was in audio engineering, and Apple dominates in multimedia.
Yeah,
Like, there's
yeah.
just really no. Even now, I will 100% concede that Apple dominates in multimedia. There's really no way to get around that. They're just really good at it. They do a good job at dealing with that. So there's a reason why every single recording studio
But
does
I
not
don't
have a
think
PC.
I think they are a little higher, but not
Yeah,
like there are a lot of people that don't use Apple, right? They're like, oh,
right.
we're not gonna do that cost,
Yeah.
and there is production
Well, here's
software
a
that really works well
what's
for
funny is
video.
so have you heard of Pro Tools?
Yeah.
That's the predominant recording studio digital audio workstation in the world, right? So it's you have to be certified to be able to work at a real recording studio. Pro Tools is ubiquitously run on Mac, like hands down, no exceptions, straight up Mac. But a little piece of trivia: Pro Tools was designed in partnership with Michael Dell, and it was supposed to be released only on Dell PCs, only on Dell PCs, which is so bizarre because everybody was like, nah, I don't think so. And they just took their 888s and put them on a Mac because Mac managed, I don't know, I still don't know why, but Mac managed the processing of the PCI cards better than the PC did, than the Dell did. And so they went to the Mac because it had higher performance and it was less laggy, right? And so obviously, when you have an artist that's paying, I don't know if it's a huge artist, they're paying $2 million a month for your studio. You can't have laggy, you can't have glitchy, you can't
Yeah.
have things freezing. Like you just can't do that. And so everybody migrated over to the Mac. Well, and ultimately, Steve Jobs was kind of at the height of his innovation at that point, and the stuff they were doing really was super cool, like the thermal controlled and isolation zones, and I mean they were just doing some really fun stuff. And when the G5 dropped in what, oh 07 or 06 or something like that, the one that you have, I think you have one, don't you, sitting over? No, you don't have it. Did you have a G5?
No, 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 no.
One of
I
those aluminum things?
no, I have a Mac Pro, but it was from 2012.
That okay, so it wasn't a G5, it was a Pro. So those G5s though were like, holy crap. And when I worked the studio that I worked in Denver, Coop Studios, they had 6 G5s racked together in the machine room. And I remember going in there and just being like, you know, I was just amazed,
Awestruck.
awestruck. It was absolutely insane to me. But Apple did a lot of really, really great stuff at that point because they were so far out ahead of everybody else. I mean, and just to be fair, at that point they were.
Yeah.
And so when OS 10 came out, man, I was infatuated with OS 10. I just didn't have the money to be able to afford to buy anything Mac at that point because obviously I was a janitor at University of Kansas and also a starving artist. So
Well, you were
that
talking
was
about that. What I did is the first time I went to the library and I found that they had those Macs that look like a light, right? Like it had the
mhm.
pod and a little thing and then the monitor.
And then the monitor. Yep.
So I found that in the library, they would let you log in. And so I created an account on it because
And
they didn't
didn't have it
restrict
locked
it.
down.
And then I would SSH into it. And I did this for, I don't know, several months. Um,
So you could just use it at night. You could just
I use it
SSH into
whenever
it
I
and
wanted. I could just SSH to this Mac, you
and,
know.
and nobody saw this,
Well, they
computer doing
eventually
stuff or
figured it out. Like
okay.
they eventually went to I think domain logins, but like
Yeah, yeah.
at that point they were just like, there's a user, you know.
Yeah, that was like when I was an undergrad and you made the Unix box available to us. I mean, I didn't use my Windows computer for anything. I would always SSH into the Unix box and do all my coding on Unix because it was better. Like I could just do way more
Well,
and I
and
didn't
that's
have to
that's
worry
why
so
I
much
had
about
set
it.
up stuff, right?
Right.
It was easier for me to manage one thing
Yep. Yep.
than
Then a
having,
bunch.
you know, oh, how do I install it? Oh, yeah, well, you got to do this, and it's just like,
Hmm.
I mean, honestly, I probably could have done a VM. That probably would have also
Right.
um, sort of had the same result, but
Right. Well, and that was like the old dual boot idea. Like I remember once upon a time that you could actually, well,
yeah.
you still
But
can, but
it's actually an awful experience, right?
it
Like
is.
dual
It's just
booting
horrible.
is
Dual
terrible.
boot sucks. It's just really stupid.
You
Nowadays
you
with
lose all your
virtualization,
state of like I got all my
right.
windows open. It's like
Yeah.
just
It's really stupid.
get another computer. They're
Yeah, just
cheap.
get another computer. And nowadays, just get a virtual machine. Like forget about it. Like it's not even
Yeah.
why even worry about dual boot? Because I have a lot of people and I think more hardware purists, they're like, well, you got to do a dual boot. You got to keep them separated. And I'm like, just throw like
I think
virtual
that's just
box or
people being
VMware or
weird.
something on there.
Like
And yeah. It's on principle. It's very much on principle. It's just like
It's
this is the way
stupid.
you should do it.
No,
It's
you shouldn't. It's
yeah,
awful.
it's stupid. It's really ridiculous. I mean, and there's no reason to do it, especially with how good virtualization is nowadays. Like there's just absolutely no reason to do that. And so, yeah, that's where I just have virtual machines and more virtual machines and
Well, either virtual machines or you run it in the cloud and
or yeah,
you
or
pay
you have
by
it up
the
in the
hour.
cloud or
But
something. Yeah. Virtual machines are nice because you don't pay by the hour. But if you're doing something in production, it's nice to have something up there
well,
rocking
if you're
and
paying for
rolling.
it in the cloud, it is a virtual machine. So
Well, local virtual machine.
true, true story.
Yeah, the ones on my hard drive don't cost me anything. But yeah, and then that's the thing. Like back in the day, it was I used to just dream about having an OS 10 computer because number one, I mean their interface. Well, Mac interfaces have always been ahead of their time. Like in the past, they were ahead of their time. Even though the new iOS release now makes available things that have always been available in Android. Have you seen that?
Mm-mm.
So like changing your tile
Oh
colors and
yeah, but
stuff
see,
like
that's
that,
just them running out of.
ideas.
They
Yeah,
got to put some fins
right on the
on the
car.
car.
Make it taller. It's 57, right? Like you got to put the big huge fin on it.
Yeah,
But yeah,
exactly.
but back then, I mean, it's sort of like logarithmic, right? Like they were early in that logarithmic curve where they were throwing these just incredible user interface advancements, which Vista tried to copy, with like the arrow style or whatever they called it. And with the, you could have the blurry or the semi-transparent or whatever
Yeah, it turns out
backgrounds.
it's
And
awful.
yeah, it's horrible, absolutely
It
horrible.
looks
Because
cool. So
it
it's like
looks
the
really
other day
neat.
I went to a lab and they had a monitor that was semi-transparent. And I'm like,
Oh gosh.
yeah, this is actually worse.
Yeah, it's not
This is
good. And
not this is not Avatar. It is actually
no,
worse.
yeah, it's actually worth. Well, and I got into Windows Vista because I bought a laptop because I was running a radio station at the time, and they needed me to get a laptop so that I could go out and do all these public speaking things. And so I got the cheapest laptop I could at Walmart, and it's a Toshiba Satellite. It's sitting over on my desk or over on the shelf. It's in the museum now. I think we all end up with a museum of gadgets, right? And it had Windows Vista on it, and it was the most horrible laptop I've ever had in my entire life. I hated ever booting that thing up because I knew something was going to be wrong and I was going to have to wrestle with it, and no matter what I was going to do, it was going to be a fight, right? So, anytime I had a presentation, I'd start 24 hours in advance. I'd open the stinking thing up, run it through it, make sure everything's working, and then not right before the presentation, about an hour before the presentation, I'd boot it up, make sure that it was working. Which, by the way, if you hear a noise in the background, it's my 3D printer being annoying. So, can you hear anything?
Nope.
No, I got my podcasting mic, so it's nice and isolated. So,
Yeah, me too.
yeah.
The only
So,
thing you can hear is when I turn on the fan.
the fan right there. So, yeah, I hated Vista, and then they introduced Windows 8 and then 8.1, and just totally lost my trust. Windows 7 was great though. So I really liked. I
Well,
think of all the
I think
OSs.
Windows sort of just went up. XP they kind of dipped with Vista, and then
Mhm. And then
7
7
and
was
10.
fantastic.
I think they're better.
Yep, and 10. Yep. Because even like going 7, I fell in love with. Going to 10, I was really hesitant again. But then I finally went to 10, and I like 10. 10's
I
fine.
think they're
10,
fine. I mean, if they take out
yeah,
the ads, like
yeah.
10 is fine.
So
I
anyway,
actually don't like the auto update because it seems like I
yeah,
can't really run a server on
right,
it, which is
right.
annoying.
It's really annoying. So back to CrowdStrike. Way back. That's the thing that's just the funniest to me is the proprietary nature of all the drivers that they're using and
Well, but see, I actually,
how
I mean, to me, that's like normal. Like,
right.
I think clearly, from what I've read, right, they pushed an update that was full of zeros,
Yeah.
and clearly they had a lack of
Procedural.
process.
Yes. It was a
And you look at their
procedural
news
error.
statement and what they're gonna do, and it's like, well, I could have wrote that statement.
Right.
Like,
Right. See the
okay, we didn't do good enough testing, so we need to do
yeah.
that. We need to, like, you
Like
should
a
have had a
test update.
stinking hash sum of the
Yeah.
update to like verify,
To
like
verify it. Uh-huh. Like
how
the littlest things.
and then
Like push it to a
delayed
test network.
deployment.
Yeah, did they not even because it bricked everything? Did they not push it to a test network? Did they not? So it just seems like they just I
Well,
don't
it
know
sounds
what
like it was
happened.
an emergency, like,
Update, right?
but still, you've got to have
Right.
a process around it. Like, you
Yeah.
can't
This
test in prod.
instance, right? This instance is going to be. I'm going to include this CrowdStrike instance in all of my cybersecurity and software engineering courses because it is an instance of you didn't follow the procedure and you got what you I mean
Well, they didn't
consequence
have a
actions have
procedure.
consequences,
They
right? They didn't have anything, right? And that's why you have to have testing, you have to have validation, like you say all the time, trust but verify, right? Like sure, maybe the coder was
I
great,
think that was
maybe it was,
Reagan, but
or like Reagan says all the time, even though he's not alive anymore, trust but verify, right? Like even if you have the best coder on your team write the update, it doesn't matter. You sure that they're awesome, I'm sure it's an amazing update, but you still need to verify that it's right, right? And even if it's an emergency, wait a few more hours or one day, I don't know, but take that risk. Otherwise, you run into this whole bricking situation where you got blue screens of death popping up. And like I read quite a bit about it, especially from people that had to deal with it because I didn't because I run Linux.
yeah, me neither.
But for the people that had to deal with it, right? They were like, it was ridiculous. I mean, one of the guys is like, I was just sitting. He's like, I'm in charge of a data center, and I was just sitting there scrolling on my phone because everything was dead and nobody knew what was going on, and there was nothing we could do.
Well, and I mean, the reason why it was so impactful is that you had to physically
Mm-hmm.
touch every device that had to be
To get it to fixed. Yeah,
fixed. And so, when that type of situation occurs, right, that's like worse than
yeah.
anything
It's a
else. Like,
bad scenario.
because you typically, right, you have rollbacks and you can go
Right.
back to it. I mean, clearly they should have additionally put code in there to say, if I've rebooted 5 times, like, maybe I shouldn't have, I should remove the file that was
Right.
added,
And roll back. Right.
or
And that's a
or you know, it really should, like, it should
that,
have
that's I
been
think
in
the
something
lesson.
that if even if it, like, when I code, right, like when I'm making an endpoint, I'm throwing a try catch around it because I'm
Yep.
like, well, I don't think it'll go wrong, but like it
What if it
can,
does?
and I
Right.
don't necessarily know what it is that will do
Right.
it. And if I just return a 500 because it through an exception caught it and just said 500, like, that doesn't help me.
Doesn't help at all. No.
Like, I
And that's
have
the
no
thing.
idea what happened at that point. So
Right.
you know, one of the things I've watched some other YouTubers, and a couple things that I take away from it is that you every time you program, right, you're making assumptions. And so if
Uh,
if you're making an assumption, just put an assertion in there, like,
right. Right.
that this should
Just
always
do
be
it.
true. And then if you run
Right.
across that, now you've found something that you thought was always true, but in
It's
fact
not.
wasn't. And why is
Right.
that, right? So do you need
Right.
a guard? Do you need
Right. Right. And that's the thing I think that the CrowdStrike thing is it's a lesson on being disciplined in the way that you produce your software. Because I think there was just so many different things that fell through the cracks, like simple try except, simple testing, some validation, just the basics of software development didn't happen, right? And so that means, my question is what about leadership, right? So who is running that production pipeline, and why were all of those things allowed to fail to the point where it did what it did, which is probably one of the biggest mess ups in recent history with computers. It's like so widespread and so impactful. And and I think the issue is
Well,
it
I mean,
wasn't one big
you're sort of
mistake. It was
excluding all of the, like, Code Red and NIMDA, and, like, I think
right,
some of those worms, right? Those are, like, malicious on purpose. You know,
right,
I
right.
I mean,
Maybe in terms of
I guess I don't
visibility,
care because it didn't
right,
affect me, but
right.
I guess I'm
That's why the whole CrowdStrike thing has been weird for me because I haven't noticed anything. There's been nothing in my life that has changed
of course I don't
on this. But
fly, so
yeah, but yeah, I haven't flown either. I stay close to home. There's really nothing that I do. but I've heard a lot about it, because obviously as cybersecurity guys, we stay up on current events, and so it's like on my feeds of the stuff that I watch, it feels like the end of the world, in a way, right?
Yeah.
Because so many people are talking about it,
Well, like
and
half of the Fortune 1000 companies used it.
right, went down with it. Yep. Well, I mean, if it grounds air traffic, I mean, talk about critical system security, right? Like air traffic and stuff like that. That's a critical system for or world infrastructure.
Yeah, but it was ticketing. It wasn't like the safety stuff, you know.
Right, right,
Those
right.
systems are
But
actually
I don't think it's the
much better.
safety. If if a road gets shut down, it's not unsafe, but it definitely has an impact on the world.
Yeah.
Right. So it's losing it's not unsafe, but it is losing a resource, right? It's like the Panama Canal. If the Panama Canal shuts down, holy crap, like it's not good. It is a really, really bad situation. It's not like anybody dies or anyone was hurt, but the economic and social ramifications are massive, right? And so getting planes grounded for even a few hours or a day is just brutal because they're ticketing 6 months, 10 months, 12 months out, right? And they have this pipeline of flights that have to happen. And if they don't happen, everything gets backed up. And then it's the old traffic jam, the wave traffic jam, right? Like just because someone slammed on their brakes, now 45 minutes later, everybody is still slamming on their brakes at that same spot because it just waves back and waves back and waves back, even though the thing is long gone that caused it. And that's where I
That's
think,
why I go for the
uh-huh.
like I don't know if I'm super useful or super annoying like in slow traffic cuz I'm like
I try to
I'm
steady it
maintaining
out.
a giant gap and I'm
Yes.
trying to go the
Yes.
same speed and
I think I think of it as a buffer. I think I'm a computer guy, so of course I think of it as a buffer. I'm like, well,
exactly.
I gotta have a buffer here, otherwise we're gonna get glitchy. And so I do the same thing. I try to maintain a steady speed, especially in stop and go traffic, because then behind me, hopefully it straightens that wave out a little bit,
Yeah. Yeah.
because people in general are not very good about regulating speed because they're not really thinking about it. They're just pushing the brakes and then going and pushing the brakes and then going and pushing and so I'm like, yeah, I'd rather not do that.
Yeah, I already spent
And
enough in gas money.
right, I don't need to be doing that. And wear and tear and all that kind of stuff. Plus, it drives your blood pressure up, and it's just miserable. It's a miserable experience. So anyway, well, I gotta go. So that hour went by really fast.
Yep. Well, hey, it's good to talk again and
Yeah.
I think
Next week, same bat time, same bat. Well, not same bat time.
yeah,
The as
the
this
other bat time.
the other bat time, not this bat time. We'll call this one the Robin time, and that one's the bat time. We'll do the same bat time. There we go.
Well, I listened to Linus Tech Tips and he says same bad time, same bad channel because that way he's not infringing
On
on
copyrights, right?
yeah, Batman.
Uh, I love one of my favorite videos ever was Linus Tech Tips holding the Apollo memory modules,
Yeah.
and all of the comments where you do know he has a tendency to drop things, right?
Exactly.
Made me laugh so hard. But all right, yep, I will talk to you next week, and it'll be awesome.
All right, you gonna do our outro?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. This episode of Doc Talk is brought to you by episode 5 is brought to you by CrowdStrike, the the premier
The
premier
premier way
cybersecurity,
to stop Windows from working.
the premier way to stop Windows from working. CrowdStrike.